The morning sun hadn't yet burned through the Wyoming fog when Marcus Calloway found the wounded coyote in his cattle pasture. Blood matted its silvered fur, one leg twisted at an unnatural angle, eyes wild with pain and fear. Any sensible rancher would have reached for their rifle. Marcus had lost 3 calves to coyotes just that spring. His neighbors would call him soft. His dead father would have called him worse. But something in those desperate amber eyes stopped him cold, a plea that transcended the ancient war between predator and prey, a whisper of shared suffering that only the truly lonely can recognize. What Marcus did next would set in motion a chain of events that would tear his world apart, cost him nearly everything he'd built, and ultimately reveal a truth about mercy that would echo far beyond the borders of his struggling ranch. Marcus knelt slowly, his weathered knees protesting against the damp earth. At 53, he'd spent more than 3 decades working this land, watching it drink his youth, his marriage, and most of his hope. The ranch that had been in his family for 4 generations was barely hanging on, crushed between drought, debt, and the relentless consolidation that was swallowing up small operations across the West. Easy now, he murmured, though whether to the coyote or himself, he couldn't say. The animal's breathing came in rapid, shallow gasps. Someone had shot it. Probably one of his neighbors defending their own livestock. The ethical thing, the practical thing, would be to end its suffering. Marcus pulled his phone from his pocket instead and called the one person who might understand. Dr. Sarah Chen arrived 40 minutes later in her battered pickup, the mobile veterinary unit she operated out of sheer stubborn idealism rather than profit. She treated Marcus's animals for years, often extending credit she knew might never be repaid. "You called me out here for a coyote?" She stood with hands on hips, her black hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, exhaustion evident in every line of her face. She'd been up all night with a difficult foaling at the Henderson place. "I know it's crazy," Marcus said quietly, "but I couldn't." Sarah's expression softened. She knelt beside the animal, professional assessment overriding her fatigue. Gunshot wound, fractured femur, severe dehydration. "Marcus, even if I could save it, you know I can't legally release a healthy coyote back onto your property, and rehabilitation facilities are full. The kindest thing is to kill it." "I know." Marcus met her eyes. "But what if there was another way? What if we could?" "I don't know. Give it a chance." Over the next 2 hours, in Marcus's barn, Sarah performed a minor miracle. The surgery was rough, improvised, done with equipment meant for livestock and pets, not wild predators. When it was finished, the coyote lay unconscious in a hastily constructed pen, its legs set and splinted, 4 fluids dripping into its vein. "This is insane," Sarah said, washing blood from her hands in the utility sink. "The recovery alone will take months. It might never regain full function." "And then what?" "You can't keep a wild animal. And you sure as hell can't release a coyote that's lost its fear of humans onto an active cattle ranch." "I'll figure something out," Marcus said, though he had no idea what. What he didn't know was that Tom Brennan, his nearest neighbor and a man who measured masculinity in head of cattle and acres owned, had watched Sarah's truck turn into the Calloway ranch. Tom had shot that coyote himself and felt entitled to know if his aim was improving. When he stopped by that evening and Marcus, in a moment of honest foolishness, told him the truth, Tom's face went purple. "You paid a vet to save a goddamn coyote? One of the bastards killing our calves." Tom's voice rose with each word. "While the rest of us are going broke trying to protect our herds." It was injured, Tom, suffering. "It's a predator at best." "Christ, Marcus, your daddy would roll over in his grave." Tom jabbed a thick finger at Marcus's chest. "You know what this makes you look like? Weak. And weakness spreads. Every rancher in this valley needs to show a united front, and you're out here playing street Francis with the enemy." The argument escalated, harsh words flying like fists in the cramped barn. When Tom finally stormed out, he left behind a promise that made Marcus's blood run cold. "This valley's got no room for fools who choose animals over people. You'll see." Tom Brennan was a man of his word, for better or worse. Within a week, Marcus started noticing the changes. The weekly poker game he'd attended for 15 years suddenly had no space for him. At the feed store, conversations stopped when he entered. His request to join the cooperative cattle drive that fall was politely declined without explanation. When his aging tractor broke down and he called around for help, men who'd borrowed his equipment dozens of times were suddenly too busy. The whisper campaign was subtle but devastating. Marcus Calloway had gone soft, they said. Can't be trusted to do what's necessary. Probably one of those animal rights nuts. Before long, the story had morphed in the telling. Marcus was keeping a whole pack of coyotes, practically running a wildlife sanctuary while his neighbors' livelihoods were under attack. Sarah faced her own backlash. 3 longtime clients found new vets, citing vague concerns about her judgment and priorities. The feed store owner, Tom's cousin, started making her wait weeks for orders that used to arrive in days. "I'm sorry," Marcus told her one evening as she checked on the recovering Coyote, which they'd started calling Ghost for its pale coat. "I never meant to drag you into this." Sarah watched Ghost hobble across the pen, testing its healing leg. Against all odds, the animal was recovering. "I made my choice," she said. "Same as you. I just wish I understood why you made yours." Marcus was quiet for a long moment. "My son," he finally said. "Daniel. He died 7 years ago. Car accident. He was 17. Sarah's hand found his arm. "Marcus, I'm so sorry. I didn't know." "Not many people do. We don't talk about it much out here." His voice was rough with old grief. "The night before he died, we had a fight. Stupid teenage stuffer. He wanted to quit the ranch, go to college, study environmental science. I told him he was abandoning his heritage, his duty. Said some things I can never take back." He paused, watching Ghost. "The last thing Danny did before he left the house was try to help a stray dog that had wandered onto the property. Spent 20 minutes coaxing it out from under the porch, gave it food and water. I yelled at him for wasting time, for being soft. He looked at me with such disappointment and said, 'Dad, just because something's hard doesn't mean being kind is wrong.'" Tears tracked down Marcus's weathered face. "When I saw that Coyote lying there, bleeding and scared, I heard Danny's voice. And I thought, what if this time I choose kindness? What if this time I'm not too hard, too practical, too much like my father to show mercy? What if, just once, I could make a choice Danny would be proud of?" Sarah wiped at her own eyes. "He would be proud, Marcus. What you did or what we did or it mattered. Tell that to my bank account, or my neighbors, or the future of this ranch." The isolation deepened as summer wore into fall. Marcus's credit at the feed store was quietly revoked. When a fence line went down in a storm, none of his neighbors showed up for the traditional work party, forcing him to spend money he didn't have on hired help. The message was clear: reject the community's values, and the community rejects you. The breaking point came in October. Marcus applied for an emergency loan to make it through winter, something he'd successfully done twice before. The loan officer, who'd approved those previous requests with a handshake and a smile, now sat across from him with a pained expression. "Marcus, I want to help, but the board, they have concerns about your judgment, your ability to make sound business decisions." The officer couldn't meet his eyes. "Tom Brennan's on the board." He was very vocal. Marcus left the bank in a daze. Without that loan, he'd lose the ranch before spring. Everything his family had built, gone. And for what? One injured coyote that would soon be healthy enough to release into a world that had no place for it. That night, sitting alone in his kitchen with a bottle of whiskey he couldn't afford, Marcus reached his lowest point. The phone rang. Sarah, checking in as she'd done every night for months. He didn't answer. What was there to say? That she'd been right? That mercy was a luxury neither of them could afford? He was seriously considering putting the ranch up for sale when he heard the commotion outside. Stumbling into the night, he found Ghost's pen damaged, the gate hanging open. His heart seized with panic. Had Tom come to finish what he started? Had Ghost escaped? Then he heard the bleating. In the far pasture, illuminated by the rising moon, Ghost stood over one of Marcus's pregnant ewes. The sheep was on her side, clearly in distress with a difficult birth. As Marcus approached, he saw something that stopped him in his tracks. Ghost wasn't attacking. The coyote was standing guard, circling the laboring ewe, keeping back the other sheep that might trample her in their nervousness. Marcus worked through the night to deliver twin lambs, both healthy despite the complications. And through it all, Ghost maintained its vigil, as if repaying a debt only it understood. When Sarah arrived at dawn, Marcus had finally called here as she found Rancher, Coyote, and newborn lambs in an exhausted pile, unlikely allies against the harsh mathematics of nature. "I don't believe it," she breathed. "Neither do I," Marcus admitted. "But I saw it." Ghost protected her, kept her safe. They both knew it didn't change the fundamental reality. Ghost was healed now, nearly ready for release. The ranch was still failing. The community's judgment still hung heavy. One miraculous night didn't solve anything practical. But Sarah pulled out her phone. "Can I take a picture?" "Why?" "Because sometimes people need to see what kindness looks like, what it creates, even when it doesn't make sense." She posted the photo on social media with a simple caption: "A rancher saved a coyote's life." Tonight, the coyote returned the favor. This is what happens when we choose mercy. Neither of them expected what happened next. The story went viral, shared thousands of times within hours. News outlets picked it up, local at first, then regional, then national. Within 3 days, Good Morning America was calling. The story resonated in ways neither Marcus nor Sarah could have predicted. In a world that felt increasingly harsh and divided, here was evidence that kindness could bridge even the oldest of enmities. Donations started arriving. Small amounts at first at $10, $20 from people touched by the story. Then larger amounts from animal welfare organizations, from churches, from school classes who'd read about Ghost and wanted to help. Within 2 weeks, strangers had contributed enough to save Marcus's ranch. But more than money, what arrived was something Marcus had lost: hope. Letters poured in from around the country, from people sharing their own stories of choosing kindness when it didn't make sense, of mercy that seemed foolish until it became miraculous. A teacher in Ohio who'd spent his own money on shoes for a homeless student who'd gone on to become a doctor. A woman in Florida who'd taken in her ex-husband's new wife and children when cancer left them destitute. A firefighter in Oregon who'd risked his career to save a dog from a burning meth lab. The world, it turned out, was hungry for evidence that goodness mattered. The attention forced a reckoning in the valley. As national media descended on their small community, the question became unavoidable: did they want to be known as the people who punished a man for showing mercy? Tom Brennan found himself facing uncomfortable questions from his own children, who'd read the viral posts and didn't understand why Grandpa's friends were being mean to Mr. Calloway. 3 weeks after Sarah's post, Tom appeared at Marcus's door. His face was red, his jaw tight with the effort of words that didn't come easy. "I was wrong," he said simply. "About you, about what strength looks like. My grandson asked me why I was mad at you for being nice, and I didn't have a good answer. Not one that didn't make me sound like my own father, anyway. And I swore I'd never become him." Marcus stood silent, waiting. "The way we treated you and Sarah, that wasn't community. That was cruelty. And I'm sorry. I'm asking if maybe we could start over." Marcus looked at this man who'd made his life hell for months. This man who was also a father, a grandfather, someone carrying his own weight of inherited hardness. He thought about Danny, about the cycles of toughness that crushed tenderness, about how easy it was to mistake cruelty for strength. "Come in," Marcus said. "Let's have some coffee." The reconciliation wasn't instant or complete. Some neighbors remained skeptical, though most were simply relieved to have an excuse to end the ostracism. The community began, slowly, to heal. Sarah's practice recovered as clients sheepishly returned. The feed store owner apologized with a handshake and 6 months of extended credit. And Ghost, Marcus worked with wildlife rehabilitation experts to find a sanctuary in Montana that could take a coyote too habituated to humans for full release but healthy enough to live a good life. The day he drove Ghost north, Sarah came with him. "Think we did the right thing?" she asked as they watched Ghost explore its new home, a sprawling enclosure with other rescued wildlife. "I think Danny would say we did," Marcus replied, "and maybe that's all that matters." Back home, the ranch struggled on as it always had, but with something new. Marcus started offering his barn as an overnight stop for the growing network of animal rescuers moving creatures across the West. It wasn't much, but it was something, a legacy of mercy instead of just stubborn endurance. On the first anniversary of saving Ghost, a package arrived. Inside was a framed photo of the coyote in its sanctuary, healthy and alert, with a note from the Wildlife Center. "He's teaching the newer rescues how to survive. Your kindness is still multiplying." Marcus hung the photo in his kitchen, right next to one of Danny. Two reminders that being soft isn't the same as being weak. That sometimes the hardest thing you can do is choose gentleness. That mercy given can return in ways you never expect, creating ripples that touch shores you'll never see. The rancher had stuck his hand where conventional wisdom said don't reach. He'd offered help where tradition demanded hardness. And while fury had indeed followed, so had something else: redemption, community, and the quiet revolution that happens when even one person decides that kindness matters more than fitting in. In a world that often mistakes cruelty for strength, Marcus Calloway had learned what his son tried to teach him, that the bravest thing you can do is stay tender. And sometimes, against all odds, the world rewards that bravery with grace.